Welcome to my presentation on altitude. This presentation considers the effects of altitude physiologically and what benefits it provides for athletes in training as well as in competition. It also looks at methods of training at altitude or recreating the effects of being in a hypoxic environment. So first of all, what is altitude? Altitude is known as the height above sea level which you're at. At sea level, air is composed of 20.93% of oxygen, 79.04% of nitrogen, and 0.03% of carbon dioxide. This does not change even if the altitude does. Barometric pressure is the total pressure that all of the gas in the atmosphere put onto the body. At sea level, the barometric pressure averages around 760 millimeters of mercury. As the altitude increases, the barometric pressure decreases, with the pressure reading around 526 millimeters of mercury at 3,000 meters. When the altitude increases, the pressure which these gases produce decreases, called hypoxia, which has a knock-on effect to partial pressures within the body, which is also known as hypoxemia. Although there are many altitudes which have adverse effects on the body, the ideal height at which to live and gain benefits of this training is thought to be around 2,100 meters and 2,500 meters. At above 3,000 meters, that is considered to be high altitude, which may lead to acute mountain sickness or severely pulmonary edema or cerebral edema, which is when fluid leaks through the blood vessels and into the brain, resulting in swelling and other threatening hypoxic effects of the body if the altitudes are above 5,500 meters. Altitude is used as an ergogenic aid in training for sports. An ergogenic aid is performance enhancer. Some are illegal, such as blood doping, but like altitude, it can also be legal, such as caffeine. Altitude training is found to alter blood lactate levels and result in acclimatization. Being at such heights has allowed scientists and trainers alike to discover what happens to the body when living in lower pressures than normal. In 2016, Kramer explained that there are many acute responses to performing at altitude in hypoxia. The first is that ventilation as well as heart rate increases due to the partial pressures in the body. Following this, the oxygen transportation around the body decreases due to less saturated hemoglobin with oxygen. Tidal volume will increase at rest, with the respiratory rate increasing when participating in activities at a higher altitude. Due to the increase in respiration, the carbon dioxide partial pressure decreases, and this increases the blood pH levels to above 7.4. This pH allows increased ventilation to be maintained within comfortable limits. This then further allows oxygen to bind with active hemoglobin and stop the body shutting down altogether. This has been further supported by Dybart in 2017, whose 10-day study, based at an altitude camp of 1,828 meters above sea level, tested cross-country runners. They found that after altitude intervention, the blood lactate levels were statistically significant after the participants had exercised, which could lead to an advantage within training or competitions. This image shows the partial pressure of oxygen and what pressure to experience and use within the body tissue. At sea level, the body's natural course isn't disturbed. The oxygen diffusion gradient is 45 millimeters of mercury higher than the diffusion rate at 4,300 meters. The partial pressure of the arterial blood at 4,300 meters is similar to that of the venous blood at sea level, showing the effects of acclimatization. Although this isn't the usual height to train at, it shows the hypoxic effects on the body and how it can be used to benefit training and competing at sea level. One of the first major sporting events to be held at high altitude was the Mexico City Olympics. Beforehand, it was caught with a lot of criticism due to the height at which the athletes would be competing at. An English doctor of sports medicine, Roger Bannister, who was the first man to break the 4-minute mile, was a prominent figure in the altitude battle before the games had begun. In 1996, he stated, "Opportunities to acclimatise will be left to the differing wealth of the countries and to the ingenuity, even ruthlessness of their coaches." During the Mexico City Olympics, athletes were at an altitude of 2,240 meters. It was argued whether others would be at an unfair advantage, and those who haven't trained or competed high before would do considerably worse than those who are used to the altitude. At this altitude, the lower air pressure would be much more difficult for the oxygen to be transported around the vascular systems, and this would lead to a greater breathing depth and the heart rate would increase. The backlash sparked outrage in some countries, with some even saying that athletes could die. However, there was a positive performance from athletes who are competing in anaerobic events, such as long jump, where athlete Bob Beamon jumped a new world record of over 50 centimeters of the previous. However, a long distance event had increased time due to being reliant on cardiovascular endurance. Due to many coaches seeing the progress made in seconds or centimeters during the games, there was an increase in research into the effects of altitude on performance. This is where concepts evolved for athletes to live high and train low. Live high and train low is a method of altitude training where the individual lives at moderate elevation between 2,000 meters and 2,700 meters but train at a much lower altitude of less than 1,500 metres. Levine and Strayed-Gunnarsson conducted the initial study of the live high, train low principle. 13 male and female runners took part in a 28-day training session where they lived at 2,500 metres above sea level and trained at 1,250 metres above sea level. These changes were noticeable compared to the control group within the third day, where participants showed a drastic increase to their red blood cell mass and haemoglobin size. This study also confirmed that when participants returned towards sea level, they had an increased VO2 max and greater endurance performance, which could be directly correlated with that physiological adaptations made from living high and training low. Clark argued that when training for low-intensity aerobic training, the submaximal VO2 was unchanged at different altitudes. This suggests that if low-intensity training can be maintained at altitude, the oxygen being transported around the body should be similar to that. However, in a later study produced by Sharma, they found that when athletes worked at a higher intensity, the exertion rate was increased, showing an increase in VO2 max, reflecting that training at high altitude and high intensity greatly changes oxygen consumption compared to sea level. Living high and training low can have serious damage to the body if not done correctly. Altitude sickness can occur when increasing altitude too quickly. However, on the way back down, reverse altitude sickness can also be prevalent. Both types of sickness have the same symptoms, such as headaches, insomnia, fatigue, shortness of breath, and this all happens when you descend faster than when your body can catch up, which thins the blood. There are also other practices in altitude trainings, which is becoming more and more prevalent in the community. In more recent times, athletes have begun using devices and other equipment to replicate the hypoxic effects of altitude. Although these have the same physiological effects on red blood cells and haemoglobin, they also provide athletes with easier methods of adaptations to altitude. One method is a simulated altitude that is created through a reduction in the concentration of oxygen, called a normobaric hypoxic compartment, which creates the equivalent amount of oxygen as to what there would be at 2,000 metres or 2,300 metres. This is also called a nitrogen apartment. It was created in Finland and looks similar to hotel rooms for the comfort and living of the athletes. The biometric pressure inside the apartment is the same at sea level, however the concentration of oxygen is similar to that of 2,000 metres. For this, athletes are expected to live and sleep in these rooms for up to 18 hours a day and complete their regular training at sea level, outside of the apartment, called ambient normoxia. Namela supported a live high, train low method. This studied 10 male and 400 metre sprinters for 10 days at an altitude of 2,200 metres in the nitrogen apartment. They did their training routine at sea level. We found that after 7 days of training and hypoxic conditions, they confirmed that the anaerobic performance is significantly increased due to the change in resting blood pH level. Another method of acute hypoxia is through supplemented oxygen. Participants train at normal level and take on supplemented oxygen at sea level during training, usually in the form of a gas canister. Hamilanian included supplemented oxygen to a group of athletes in 3 workouts a week for 4 weeks. He found that this provided an increase in sea level performance and velocity. Graham also supported this by finding the reduced rate of lactate in blood and in the muscles. A less expensive method of decreasing the available oxygen is on the rise, which is altitude masks. The masks allow athletes to stay within the limits of respiratory compensation threshold and increase the time that athletes can stay within this threshold without passing to the severe exertion stage. The masks have been studied and show higher concentrations of growth hormone after hypoxia than in the group of normoxia, proving that they replicate that of the physiological benefits of altitude and limited oxygen. To conclude, altitude can have many physiological benefits in both anaerobic and aerobic activities and sports. This is down to the higher red blood cell count after departing hypoxic conditions. This allows more oxygen to bind with the increased active haemoglobin. As further research, you can look into the Great Britain Altitude Centre, which specialises in the benefits of altitude training in sports, mountaineering and health. It will be very useful if you want to adapt and expand your knowledge on how the oxygen can be used in many, many different ways in sports to benefit all.